page 559 in that Bible, and I have no idea what page in your Bible, but it is the book of Ecclesiastes. If you don't know where that is, go to Psalms, which is right in the middle of your Bible. Turn right. You're going to get Psalms, Proverbs, and then this book of Ecclesiastes. And we're going to camp out here for the next several weeks and just see what God has to say to us from here. And we're going to be in chapter 12. Now, I know it's a shocker, right, that you said, I thought I was here at the beginning, and yet you're opening at the end. And that's because we are going to do what some of you'd like to do. We're going to get a spoiler to the story. In fact, we've entitled this sermon, Spoiler Alert. So if you're the kind of person that's like, I don't like spoilers, I don't want to know what's going on, then close your ears for the next couple minutes. No, listen, and we'll come back to this. But I am the kind of person that likes to read the end of the book. Let's just do it. How many of you are the kind of person that you'll watch a movie and you'll enjoy it just the same, but you also kind of like to know where this movie's headed and what the end is? Let's see some hands raised. Okay, about half. Good, I'm that way. I'll be sitting there. Now, Angela, my wife, is complete opposite. So I'll be sitting there watching a movie, and I'm like, I got to know where this is going, and I'll be on my phone reading the end. And she's like, Andy, shut your phone off. You're ruining it for all of us. And then I say things like, oh, babe, it's going to get good. It's going to get good. Oh, man, this is going to be good. I just love that. I love spoiling it, but I also enjoy it. And hopefully, and I do believe that this will not spoil the rest of the book and study for you. But we believe that it is imperative that a book like Ecclesiastes, we start at the peak. And we start at what the point is. And then the rest of the chapters, we run through the filter of what we're going to study today. So if we don't, the book of Ecclesiastes, I'm not going to lie, can be a little bit depressing and hopeless. You might leave if we didn't do this feeling like, well, what's the point? What's the point of living? I mean, Solomon basically just rained on my parade and took all the fun out of it. And yet we find that that's not the case, and we're going to start by understanding that it is not the case. And so we're going to spend the few minutes today looking at the end of the book before we go back to the beginning. Now, Ecclesiastes is part of the wisdom books of the Old Testament. It sits amidst the other poetry books like Job and Psalms and Proverbs and Song of Solomon. The author, though it has been questioned, is traditionally and widely believed to be that of King Solomon, the son of King David. It's a book of perspective. It's a book, it's a narrative, if you will, of the preacher. He calls himself the preacher or the teacher, as some translations would put it. It reveals the depression and inevitably results from seeking happiness in worldly things. The depression that comes and the inevitable emptiness and hopelessness and futile attempts to find any sense of meaning and happiness in anything that is worldly. That's the point. It gives Christians a chance to see the world through the eyes of a person who, though very wise, is trying to find meaning in that which is temporary, that which is fleeting, that which is human, that which is worldly. And finding in all of this, as we're going to see over the next couple minutes, nothing in those things. That's where we're headed. Now, Proverbs is about wisdom for people who want success. If you were to study the book of Proverbs, it's a bunch of Proverbs wisdom for people who want success. If you read the other poetry book like Job, that is wisdom about someone who lost success. But Ecclesiastes is about somebody or giving wisdom for people who have success and have been left wondering what the whole point of it all is. I think this is incredibly applicable to us in our culture, in our place, because we, in comparison to the rest of the world, live in an incredible place of great success. And many of us are still wondering what's the whole point, or there is no joy and there is no happiness. And many people are turning to all kinds of other alternatives to find hope and happiness because what they hoped they found it in, they did not find it in. And that is where the preacher, King Solomon, has brought us. I want you to draw your attention with me to the end there in chapter 12, verse 9. And I want to look together at these verses through verse number 14. You follow along. I will read as we read, remembering this is the words of God preserved for us so that we might grow and develop by them. Here's what he says, verse number 9. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Now, over the top of this passage, I want us all to see and write down and remember this big idea. It's simple, and it goes like this. God's wisdom comes to the needy. God's wisdom comes to the needy. Now, we've got to understand that for a second, because you say, great, I need, right? Now, we use that word need flippantly in our day, don't we? I need a new house. I need a new spouse. I need a new job. I need a new car. I need a vacation. At the soccer field yesterday, my son said, I need a snow cone. We use it flippantly, as if we are believing or duped into feeling like our happiness or our sense of meaning and fulfillment is lacking. And if we just get one of those things, we would find meaning and fulfillment. Now, I don't know that we always mean that, but often when we say that, that's what we're saying. I just need that. If I lived in that neighborhood, man, things would be different. If I drove that car, if I had that job, if I had that in my life, if I had that experience, if I had that context, everything would be different. Things would be all different. My joy would be different. My sense of fulfillment would be different. My purpose in life would be different. The problem is that every time we get one of these things that we think we need, we find that they don't fulfill like we hoped they would. They overpromise and they underdeliver. In mountaineering, which obviously I am one of those mountain climbing kind of guys, right? Which is not true, but there's a thing called false peaking, or to make a false summit. Now, I remember as we were climbing up Gold Mine Trail back here at the Santan Mountains, we were climbing up the trail, and there is a bit of a false peak. There's a part where you get, if you've ever been up there, that just kind of lands as like a little bit of a plateau, and then you finish from that spot up to, or that saddle up to the actual peak. And every time we take it and we're about to get to the top, my kids say, yes, we're almost there. And I just kind of go, it's going to be great when we get there. False summiting or false peaking is that. It is that you get to it, something that appears to be the peak. It appears to be the pinnacle of the mountain, but upon reaching it, it turns out that the summit is higher and you still have to go further. In fact, many mountaineers and mountain climbers find significant psychological effects by false summiting or false peaking. It discourages them and it dashes their hopes, and makes them feel like they're a failure when they think, I've made it. We're there, only to look up and find that they're still a couple hours away. It ruins, it robs you of all hope and all fulfillment in that endeavor. And here's the reality. As you are seeking hope in the things of this earth, as you are seeking to find fulfillment in the things of this earth, it is a never-ending sense of false summits. I'm there, but why do I feel so empty? I finally got the promotion I was looking for. I'm finally in the income bracket that I thought would make me happy. I finally have the house. I finally have the spouse. I finally have the context. I am where I want to be, and yet I still find no hope in this. Why? Because it's a false peak. It overpromises and underdelivers, and that in all of this book of Solomon, he is leaning into that to help us realize that these pursuits of earthly things to give us fulfillment and joy are false peaks that always leave you disappointed and frustrated. So the key to getting wisdom or being needy is to recognize what I actually need in order to find the meaning of life and a sense of fulfillment in it. If Solomon's intent was to give me wisdom so that I would avoid the failures or the hopelessness of these things that fall summit me, then I need to have the proper perspective of my needs. What is it that I need? What is it that I must recognize is important for this to happen? So I've got 4 of them from our passage today that as Ecclesiastes comes to a close, as Solomon's throwing out the landing gear and he's dropping into the runway, he's saying, here's where we're going. Here's what you actually need. Here's, not all of those things, here's what you actually need in order for you to find what I'm trying to get at through 11 chapters of this. And there's 4 of them, and I call these the 4 wisdom-giving needs that I must have in order to get the wisdom that helps me live upside down. So let's do it this way. In your notes, you can put it, in order to live an upside down life, I need, number 1, I need this preacher. I need this preacher. Now let me explain what I mean by that. Let's look at that. Verse number 9, besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. Now, have you ever been in a church service and the preacher begins his introduction to his sermon, he has you turn to his text and you're like, he's preaching at me today. You ever been there? Like, this one was for me. This one, this message, this sermon that this teacher is giving through the book of Ecclesiastes, this is for us. We need it. And so Solomon here, he says he was wise. He taught people knowledge. He took thoughtful care in producing this book. He says that he pondered or carefully weighed in his mind and searched out and set in order. He carefully arranged many proverbs. So Solomon said that he sought to give his book an aesthetic pleasing as well as a logically and truth accurate element to this point. So he's writing all of this to give us accurate truth and wisdom. And all of this is based upon his experiences as the wealthiest, wisest, and most popular man in all the world. It's based on these experiences of his life. So what he wrote about was this. This is what I said this to my son. I was driving here today. I had a proud dad moment, one of those proud dad moments. And Adrian says, Dad, what are you preaching today? I was like, good question, son. It's not about Spider-Man or Superman or something gross. It was a good question. So I'm like, well, I'm preaching about Ecclesiastes and how, I gave him the whole spiel, what I'm probably giving you right now. And he looked a little bit unimpressed, but it was a good moment. And then I said, Adrian, what if anything in your world that you think that you could find happiness in, or one thing in the world that you could change that would take away your lack of happiness, what would you change? He said, sin. I said, yes, that's right, boy. That's my boy. I think he knew that's what I wanted him to say, but I'm not sure what that was. But that was what I was trying to get to him across was this. Adrian, listen, whatever you think about and hope that you can pursue on this earth to give you a sense of fulfillment and joy, Solomon experienced. Everything. He had money, he had homes, he had women, he had parties, he had popularity, he had humanitarian projects, he had wisdom, he had hope, he had many of the other things that all of us would say, if I could just live the life of Solomon, I would be happy. And Solomon said, no, I've been there, I've done that, I got the t-shirt, and it doesn't work. Anything that anyone is thinking will finally bring meaning and purpose to their life has been experienced by Solomon, and he knows it personally. Therefore, when he tells us that all these things are vanity, which we're going to get to, all these things are empty, all these things are meaningless without any ability to bring any joy and fulfillment, he is not speaking from ignorance. He's not that guy that says, you don't want to go to there. You don't want to go to Disneyland. That place is boring. And then you say, well, have you ever been? And they're like, no, but I just know it's going to be boring. That's not this guy. This guy is saying, you don't want this. And when we ask Solomon, how do you know? He says, I've done it. You don't need more money. Why, Solomon? That's something rich people say, right? No, you don't need it because it doesn't fulfill like you think it would. You don't need another relationship. It won't fulfill like you think it would. And so Solomon is speaking not from a place of ignorance. He is speaking from a place of, I've been there, I've done that, and I'm here to tell you the road is out this way. Don't go, turn around. Go that way, go that way. G. Campbell Morgan said Ecclesiastes is an inspired confession of failure and pessimism when God is excluded. When man lives under the sun and forgets the larger part, which is always over the sun, the eternal and abiding things. That's inspired through the life of this man. Now here's the reality, or here's the application from that is this. If we fail to learn from the experiences of the men of the past, we are destined to repeat their mistakes. Listen to this, please. If you fail to learn from the guy like Solomon, who said, I've been there, I've done that, and it's empty, and it's hopeless, and it's vain. Not just because of his experience, but because God is inspired in what he is saying, inspiring what he is saying. If we fail to listen and we fail to heed his counsel in this, then we are destined to repeat their mistakes. And by the way, you too will find that they are just as empty as Solomon promised they were. So we need this preacher. We need this testimony. If you fail to listen to this guy, and you fail to listen over the next several weeks at all the things that he points out are hopeless and meaningless and vanity, then you are one of two things. You are going to be the person who refuses to listen to truth and has to go experience it yourself. And you're going to find at the end of your experience that he was right. Why didn't I just listen to him? Don't you hate it when somebody's right and you say, why didn't I just listen to him? You don't want to admit it and you don't want to tell him, but that's the reality of what this is going to be if you go and determine to experience these in spite of listening or without listening to the counsel of this preacher. We need it. If we don't listen to it, we also risk lying to ourselves and saying something like this. Well, that truth is probably good for him, but it just doesn't apply to me. Like you probably right now may be arguing with me and you may be saying, well, sure, I think that probably Solomon felt that way, but if I had a couple $1,000,000 in the bank, I think I'd be happy. You're arguing with me. I can tell. I can tell when the crowd argues with me and you're arguing with me, and I'm telling you that we need this preacher. We need this preacher because he is saying, no, it's not worth it. At the end of it all isn't there to stand with us before God. It isn't worth it. It overpromises and it underdelivers, and we need this testimony so that we don't repeat the same foolish mistakes that he did, right? Okay. There's a second thing that I need. Not only do I need this preacher, I need these words. I need these words. Verse 11, notice what he says. So verse 9 and 10, he already said it, that he studied and arranged. So like Solomon towards the end of his life, or whatever stage this was in his life, he probably sat down and he looked back across his life and he sat there contemplating, looking out the window of his fancy porch or wherever it was, and he started trying to think, how can I say this to convince the people in the year 2020? I don't know if he was thinking that way, but God was. How can I say this in such a way that in 2020, those people in Queen Creek, Arizona will listen to me? And he arranged them nicely. He arranged them appropriately. He found in verse 10 words of delight. He accurately and uprightly wrote the words of truth. And he says, these words of the wise are like goads, like nails firmly fixed, are the collected sayings that are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these, of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. So from Solomon's experiences in his life, he learned some lessons of wisdom, and he began to write them down logically, literally, and intellectually. He began to record them. And he said, look, what I'm about to say to you is it's not necessarily going to feel good. It's like a goad. Now I get, you and I don't know, not a goat, a goad. We don't always know what a goad is, but it's a stick with a spike on the end of it, like a cattle prod. It pokes, it hurts, it stings. When you get hit, I remember being in Colorado, I had an electrocuting cattle prod as I was on this cattle drive with this guy. I know I don't look like a cowboy, but there I was. And I was in this cattle chute, and they were castrating and branding calves. And it was a shocking experience from a boy from Las Vegas. And here I am poking these things with the electric shocker. And the cowboys came over and said, hey, Andrew, take it easy on them, man. Their hair's standing up. They're not going to be any good for me. It's like, man, this is way too fun. One kicked me in the thigh. One little calf kicked me in the thigh. It was an amazing experience, and one I was not very good at. That's what was happening here. And he's saying, look, these these words, they may not be caressing, they may not be encouraging, they may not be comforting, but I'm telling you, they may hurt, but they are helpful. They are helpful. They stimulate you in the right direction. And he says they are like, also he says there in verse 11, they are like nails firmly fixed, which is an idea of well-driven nails, or tent stakes driven deep, which hold the tent tight. So the word picture that I think that Solomon is giving here is this. The words of the wise, according to Solomon, are able to stimulate you and guide you and stabilize you in the midst of uncertainty and changing times. So once these words of wisdom get into our hearts and minds, they never leave us and always seem to guide us in the right way. It's those proverbs that we always remember, those little quippy truths that dad taught us or grandpa taught us that always stick in our minds and we never forget. That's what he's saying. He's saying it might hurt, but I want you to know you'll never forget it and it will guide you. And then he says this, which is mind-blowing. The one who actually gives this wisdom is one shepherd. In most of your Bibles, hopefully it is capitalized because I do believe that is a reference to God who is our shepherd. So what he is saying is this: the actual author of this book is not just a man, it is God. The wisdom that has been assembled in this book to help us avoid the pitfalls and emptiness of all of life's experiences is not just some guy back several thousand years ago, but it is the one shepherd who cares for us, died for us, and desires to lead us into hope and peace and life. And he says these words of wisdom that sting and stabilize are words that come from God. Then he makes this statement. This is where I really want to lean into, is verse 12. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much studiness is a weariness of the flesh. Now, if you're a college student or a high school student, do not listen to that verse for a second, okay? And talk to everybody else. But he's saying basically what it says. Beware of anything beyond these. Study these things that I'm telling you that are from the shepherd, but be careful about other teachings. People are always writing books, and too much study will make you very tired. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization keeps track of books published by country. It estimates that 2.2 million new titles are published worldwide each year. 2.2 million books are published each year. Add to that the astonishing growth of digital information. In fact, I did a Google search today. I Google searched information overload, and I had 106 million hits. Talk about informational overload. There is never an end to learning. There is never an end to philosophy or new ideas or somebody trying to say it better, bigger, or more effective. And he's saying these are all going to continue and continue and continue, but beware. Beware of all of that, because the wisdom that comes from God doesn't need a second opinion. That's what he's saying. He's saying when you get the truth, when you get the wisdom from the shepherd, which is this: beware of other things than God to find your fulfillment. Stop and beware, because much learning is just going to make you crazy. It's just going to make you crazy. They're kind of like the people that Paul spoke of in 2 Timothy, always learning and never able to arrive to the knowledge of the truth. So if you keep on looking, you're going to find second opinions, right? You're always going to be able to find an opinion that lines up with what you want to hear. You're always going to be able to search hard enough to find some kind of truth and some kind of wisdom that is pleasing to you. And here Solomon says, listen, you may not like what I'm saying, but I'm telling you truth that comes from God, and it needs to be heard, it needs to be received, and it needs to be understood, because it's going to save your life from the pitfalls that come your way or ahead of you as you're down that journey. And what are these things that he's saying? So I need this story because he's a man that experienced these things. I need these words because these are of God. And he's saying this in point number 3 that we all need to hear and we all need in order to find the wisdom that we need for this life. And that's number 3. I need this relationship. In order to live an upside down life, in order to live a life that starts on the upside and works down, I need his story, because he's experienced the things that I think will give me happiness. I need these words of wisdom because they are from God, who cares for my soul, to protect me from the pitfalls and emptiness of the things of this earth. And they all lead me to say that I need this relationship. And it's in verse 13. The end of the matter All has been heard. This is what it took Solomon 12 chapters to say. You ever been around that person who takes forever to get to the point? And you're just like, come on, get to the point. What are you trying to say? Well, Solomon did that. It took him 11 and a half chapters to get to the point, and now he's saying, all right, let's listen. This is the end of the matter. This is what we've all come to. All has been heard. Here's the point. Here's the peak. Here's the summit. Here it is. You want to know what your purpose is? You want to know the source of meaning? You want to know what your life means? Here's what it is. Fear God and keep his commandments. At the end of this man's life searching, his conclusion is this. It's all about fearing God. Fear is relational and reverent. It's a sense of awe and respect for the majesty of God. Charles Bridges says the fear of the Lord is that affectionate reverence by which the child of God bends himself humbly and carefully to his Father's law. Not the fear of a slave that's afraid to get beat and hurt. It's the fear of a son who so loves his father and knows his father and reveres his father and respects his father that he seeks to please and obey his father. David Gibson said, to fear the Lord is to remember the Creator. I love that. To fear God, listen to this, is to remember the Creator, and this is the pathway to wise living. To fear and remember is to regard God with all the adoration, love, and obedience that rightfully belong to him. So fearing the Lord and remembering our Creator makes us wise because it teaches us to live on our knees. That's what he says is after all that I've searched, after every road I've been down, after every job, after every penny I've ever made, after every relationship I've ever been in, after every good deed that I've ever been, after every book that I've ever read, and every wise piece of information I've ever received, I understand that the end of it all, the only hope of it all is not in those things. It is in this reverent, adoring relationship with God. It is not only the beginning of wisdom, it is also the beginning of joy. It is the beginning of contentment. It is the beginning of a purposeful life, to fear God and with it, keep his commandments. My conduct comes from my worship. My knowledge of God leads me to my obedience to God. Don't mix those up. Knowledge and fear and reverence of God leads to obedience. And if you get obedience first, you become a legalistic religious person that always lives by the do rather than the why, who is the person of God and a relationship with him. And he says that's the end of it all. That's the purpose of it all. That's why you are here. Philip Ryken says, Ecclesiastes mainly teaches us to see how meaningless life is without God and how little joy there is under the sun if we try to leave our Creator out of his universe. Let me say that again because that's how we live so often. It teaches us that life is meaningless without God, and there is little joy under the sun if we try to leave our Creator out of his universe. That is upside down living as opposed to downside up living. You can never live upside down until you realize that the downside doesn't work. You can never live upside down until you realize that downside doesn't work. It doesn't work because the downside always has an answer to what I need with something else that is here on the downside. My hope can only be found on the upside, and we leave ourselves disappointed in the downside when we search in the downside for what I need that can only be found on the upside. What I can only find in God, in a relationship with God, I search for here. And here always only gives me something else that is here. If it doesn't have the hope that I need and I'm looking for, then we need to change where we're searching. And we need to search again to the upside. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's where it starts. If you then have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, at the right hand of God. In Matthew 6, Jesus was teaching about all the worries that we have on earth, and he says, quit worrying about those things. Quit fretting about those things. Quit stressing about those things. How am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? How am I going to pay the bills? He says those things have a place in your life, but don't put those things first. first seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. All of the joys of life become major disappointments when I start on the downside. It is only when I start on the upside that I can actually begin to enjoy something on the downside. It is only when I start with a relationship with God. It is only when I start with fear God and keep his commandments. It is only when I start there that I can actually find a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning and stop hitting a cul-de-sac where it feels like, what in the world? This life is so hard. This life is so difficult. It has so many disappointments. It does. Because you're seeking to answer those disappointments on the downside when the answer is the upside. And that's what Solomon says. You say, well, no, if I experience with Solomon. No, Solomon says, I've been down that road. You need this preacher. You need these words. You need this relationship. It starts there. It's the upside down living. Everything on the downside is meaningless and disappointment when you leave God out of the equation. Do you guys get what I'm saying here? Are we feeling that? I feel like Ecclesiastes hits me right there. If I just had a bigger place, if I just had a church building, man, I'd be happy, right? If I just had a place, if I just had an office, if I just had a house up there, if I just had this car. No, he's saying you're searching for fulfillment and a sense of meaning in all the wrong places. I need this relationship. And then lastly, the fourth thing I need you to see. I need these perspectives. One of Solomon's purposes in writing this book, and one of the things that we learn from studying this book, is that we are given a bigger and better perspective. In verse 13, he says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. He wants us to see that we do have a purpose. There is a reason why you exist. Bro, listen, you do not exist to work that job, to pay into that 401k, to retire, move to where we already live, play golf, and then die. That's not your purpose. If that's your purpose, forget about it. I don't want it. And he says, no, that's not your purpose. That's not your duty. Your duty, your purpose, the meaning of your life is to fear God and keep his commandments. Change your perspective. And then he says, verse 14, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. What he's saying is this: I want you to have a perspective that shows you that your life does matter. What you do in your life does matter. Because at the end of it all, you will stand before God and be judged. If this passage isn't in the Bible and you just finished reading the whole of Ecclesiastes like we're going to study over the next several weeks, you would come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter. That's pointless. This is pointless. That's empty. That's empty. No joy here. No happiness there. And at the end of it all, we're going to be like, it doesn't matter. But if we have this verse like we do, then we know that God is alive, that God will judge the world. Then everything matters. This is not all there is. There is a God in heaven who rules the world. There is a life to come. And one day the dead will be raised. Every person who has ever lived will stand before God. And when that day comes, it will become clear that there is eternal significance to the decisions you make down here. So the choices you make on the downside affect the upside. And he says this reality is something that you need to see. It will matter how you used your time. It will matter if you wasted it. It will matter what you did with your money and how you spent it and how you shared it. It will matter what we did with our bodies, what our eyes saw, our hands touched, and our mouths spoke. The final message of Ecclesiastes is not nothing matters. It is it all matters. Because one day we're going to stand before a living God. We've got to keep that in perspective. You see how he changed that? Changes our perspective. I read about Tug McGraw. If you don't know who Tug McGraw is, you'll know him of one of two ways. He was a pitcher for the Mets and the Phillies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Or he is probably known by most of you as the father of Tim McGraw. You guys know what I'm talking about now? Okay, good. He had a wonderful philosophy of pitching. I read about this not too long ago. He called it his frozen snowball theory. He said, if I come into pitch with the bases loaded, and let's say heavy hitter Willie Stargell's at bat, there's really no reason I want to throw the ball. Like, the guy's too good. I don't even want to throw the ball. He's just overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. But eventually he says, I have to pitch. So I remind myself that in a few billion years, the earth will become a frozen snowball hurtling through space, and nobody's going to care that Willie Stargell hit a grand slam. So I throw the ball. Perspective, right? Like, in a billion years, who cares? Who's going to care? So I might as well throw the ball. Keeping things in perspective is huge for life. And Solomon's purpose is this: not to take all the fun out of life. Look, if you read the book of Ecclesiastes and are like, man, this guy, geez, he's a bummer. He took all the fun out of life. His purpose is to rain on my parade. I was having fun today until I listened to this book of the Bible. That's not his purpose. His purpose is to save you from the disappointments that you think are going to give you joy in the things of this earth. His purpose is to actually help you find the purpose that you're searching for, the joy that you're searching for. It's all, though, in your perspective. My purpose is not to make money. My purpose is not to live this life out for me. My purpose isn't just to raise a family. My purpose is to fear God, keep his commandments, and then one day stand before him in eternity and be judged. My perspective needs to become, I exist for God, and I will answer to God. So the question then remains, right? What do I need? Like, we're going to say this all day. I need a drink. I need a this. I need a that. Let's think about it. What you think you need that will finally make you happy and fulfilled and satisfied in this life. I promise you, what you need is not a change of circumstances in your life. It's not another material item to make you finally happy. What you need is not anything that can be found on the downside. Ecclesiastes takes 11 and a half chapters to prove that to you. He goes and says, listen, all of these things fail every time, so we've got to change our perspective. We must see what we need. Listen to the testimony of a man who's been there. Enjoy the words from God that are organized in wisdom for us, and start fulfilling our purpose by beginning a relationship with God. And this is the beauty of this whole story, is that he says, your purpose is to have a relationship with me. And by the way, I'm going to come to you and die for you so that you can have that relationship. I'm going to come and send my son to pay the penalty for your sin on the cross. And I'm going to come so that you can have that relationship, so that you can begin to find purpose in fearing me and keeping my commandments. I'm going to come the majority of the way to give you that. When I am ready to start with the upside and then work down into my life on the downside, then I am well on my way to finding my purpose and my meaning and my fulfillment and my sense of happiness and worth. That's where it begins. So we're going to take a journey over the next several weeks. Hopefully you'll come. Because whatever it is you think that's going to give you joy, I promise you Solomon deals with it and leaves you thinking, wow, that's sad, and then replaces it with the fear of God. Let's give you a few learning to lives that I want you to take from just this beginning point. I'm not going to ask them in questions this time. I'm going to give you homework learning to lives. Now, you're going to probably pull out the whole verse 12, study makes me weary in the flesh type of thing, but that's not the point. I just want to give you a couple homework assignments that you do in the quietness of the moments of your morning or whenever it is you get alone with God, and I just want you to ask yourself these questions or make these statements to you. And here's what I want you to do. Number one, I want you to do this. Rate my relationship with God, 0 to 10. And then explain. Man, I challenge you to write that down. If our relationship with God is everything, then how is yours? How's yours? Is it weak, therefore causing you to feel empty and hopeless? Have you recently said, man, this life is just, it's just hard. Just hopeless. Just hopeless. Man, I just don't know what the purpose is anymore. Listen, if that's you, let's rate that relationship with God. Tell me how it is. Write it down. Share it with your small group this week. If it's strong and it's helping you feel a sense of purpose and meaning and helping you to live on mission, then great. Awesome. Let's go. Let's keep it there. That's the upside. So rate my relationships with God 0 to 10 and explain. Number 2, list my current duties and destinations. What do you feel like you need to do and where are you going? What's your purpose? Not what you think I want to hear, not what you think the Bible's going to tell you, but based on your schedule, based on your passions, based on how you live your life, what are your duties and where are you headed in this life? And then bring yourself to be able to identify if you are living for the upside or if you are living on the downside. If your duties are, I need to find happiness and I need to find this, I need a relationship, I need a job, I need a this, these are my duties, these are my destinations, this is where I need to get if I'm going to find this happiness, then you need to reevaluate that, and that's what I want to challenge you to do. Just list them out. What do you do? What are your duties? Where are your destinations? Where are you headed? What are your desires? And then the last thing I want you to do, here's your last homework assignment, is this. Engage one person for eternity. And I even left you a little blank. Write that blank in your spot, in your notes. That blank is for someone's name. And here's why. God is alive and judgment is coming. Then the eternal state of the people around you becomes of the utmost importance. If God is real and judgment is coming, and they will stand like everybody else before God and be judged one day, then they need to know that there is a way to have a relationship with God, and that is through Jesus Christ. And you might be the very messenger that brings that glorious message into their life. And so if this is all real, and this is my purpose, and this is my meaning, then engage one person for eternity.